You may have heard that last season, Dallas traded Luka Doncic to the Lakers for Anthony Davis in one of the most impressively cooked front office moves the world and the NBA has ever seen. We won't be talking about that today because it's been talked to death. What I actually wanted to talk about was the AD side of it and sort of where things have gone since then and what could be in store for him in the future. So, things in Dallas went south fast. He got injured in his very first game, which was like the most Anthony Davis thing you could ever really imagine. And then not long after that, Kyrie tore his ACL. Just brutal. But then Dallas kept losing and somehow stumbled into the number one pick, which I've left my tinfoil hat off for the day. But if you want to see my Rob Pelinka Lakers rant and how that all could have gone, you should check that out up here. And that wasn't just any draft, that was the Cooper Flag draft. A lot of draft folks were saying that besides Wemby, he could have been about the best prospect since LeBron. Just an insane stroke of luck that saved Dallas from eternal purgatory and riots in the streets. They still had some riots in the streets, don't get me wrong, but that Kyrie injury, without the number one pick to save them, could have been unbelievably bad for their future. To begin this season, as good as Cooper Flag is, Dallas was completely incompetent for like the first month, I guess. And fans finally got what they wanted, which was Nico Harrison fired as general manager. To be fair, they've been playing a little better recently, and by better I mean they're like starting an actual point guard, even though he's undrafted and on a two-way contract. I think that tells you all you need to know. But yeah, they finally got what they wanted. Nico Harrison gone, and with him the defense wins championships. Our window is now kind of logic prison that he'd shut himself inside of. They've got Cooper Flag, Derek Lively, Max Christie, like a real young core to build around now. And also an expensive aging Anthony Davis and a currently sidelined Kyrie Irving. So they've got this weird two timelines thing going on, which, as we've seen in the NBA, just doesn't really work out long term. And something has to give. Sadly for the Mavericks, any AD trade will inevitably get the Luka for this guy. Tobias Harris is kind of a funny one when you see Detroit come up. But like the stink of that trade will just follow AD for the rest of his career, which is really unfortunate because it just isn't his fault at all. He's had enough issues of his own without being thrown into something like this, and is a great player that deserves to be remembered for something besides being the guy who Luka got traded for. I feel like you could kind of see that mentality early on. Like his first game for the Mavericks, he was really balling out, trying to be like, "Nah, I'm that guy." But then he also was that guy who got injured in the third quarter. So there have been rumblings from Dallas, probably directly from their front office, that they might try and keep AD and make a run when Kyrie comes back. But for content purposes, and because I do think he needs to get away from Dallas and move past this whole fiasco, today I want to talk AD trades. First, I think we have to talk about what AD actually is in 2025. He's tricky. He's not your number one option, at least not all the time, but he is an elite defender, a very smart defender and overall player, and kind of the sort of dude who can swing a playoff series if he's healthy enough for long enough to play in it, right? He's one of those rare guys who can raise your floor and your ceiling. And funnily enough, at the time of the Luka trade, besides the guys in the league that you'd have to be clinically insane or Nico Harrison to trade, your Jokic's, Shea, Giannis, that sort of thing, AD was probably the best player you could have gotten at the time, like a player-for-player swap at least. It's just all the other stuff that they didn't get that actually really makes that trade ridiculous. You know, like the picks, the young players, the shopping around the league to see what everyone else had. The tough part is he's in his early to mid-30s now. He's owed over $50 million now and will probably want more than that in his next contract, which is just about due. He's injury prone, obviously. The jumper's a little shaky, except for when he's playing Miami in the finals, in which case he hits it every time from everywhere. Ridiculous. But even if he is good, he might not be there when you need him, right? So most teams won't treat him like that superstar trade piece. And we're even seeing this with Giannis now, who is levels above Anthony Davis. We have to be real about that. But there is genuine concern with these calf strains and just a guy who's had injuries in general for teams to give up a boatload or all of their assets, right? Which means Dallas probably won't get superstar value back, and they didn't get superstar value back for their actual superstar, so you're going downhill very, very quickly. But looking at it conceptually from Dallas's perspective, it would be the kind of fringe star sort of return that we're thinking about. Not because AD isn't great when he's on the court, but because he's often not. And they've very clearly backed themselves into a corner by having this two timelines thing, right? It's that young group of Flag, Lively, and Christie that pretty much every team in the league could see doesn't fit with the AD and Kyrie timeline, especially since Kyrie is probably still out for most of this season. It's very possible that Dallas is just saying they want to remain competitive to try and juice up the trade market a little bit. Pretending they want to keep him is a better approach to that than saying they'll get rid of him at any cost. But there's also merit to the idea that they're not going to get real value back for him, and so arguably they may as well make a run for it with Kyrie and at least see what they have. Ultimately, I think Dallas should trade him for the following reasons. They have their pick this year, so they can tank this year and go get a good player in what's meant to be a generational draft again. Add that to the young core and carry on. Kyrie is still injured in the sense that you need him to compete with AD anyway, I think, and if you're rushing him back in a West that's really, really good, you're only losing ground. You also probably don't want to be the team that pays AD when you're sort of pivoting towards the flag timeline. He's going to be wanting, I would say, $60 million and then more in the following years, into his mid to late 30s, which with his injury history would make you nervous, I feel. And the last one is their roster balance. They've got 3 centers already, 3 more starter level power forwards, and possibly the worst guard rotation in the league. So if I'm Dallas, I want, maybe not in this order, but I want expirings to clear my books, some picks obviously, and then interesting or young players that I can see fitting that flag timeline as opposed to the AD or the 2 timelines sort of build. I've seen plenty of deals out there sending him to your Chicago's, Detroit's, New York's. I don't really want to rehash those. I think we could do some more under the radar kind of deals that maybe haven't been discussed as often yet, even if we get halfway through and realize it makes no sense at all, right? So I'm kind of envisioning 3 broad sort of categories for what his skill set could bring to a team. I'm thinking there's those ceiling teams, right, that feel like they're a move or an AD away, that want to level up and for him to take them to that next level. There's also your sort of floor teams that are playing some very unserious basketball and could use a guy who's done it before, who's obviously an elite defender, can coordinate your defense, but also like take over for a quarter offensively, and just bring an element of like grown-upness to your locker room, right? And then finally, there's those teams that are just struggling a bit right now, or maybe have some bad money on their books that could use a shake-up and a change of culture that AD just would naturally bring. So I'll list all those teams here if you want to jump to a specific one. Otherwise, let's get into it. Alright, so I'm going to start with my tier of what I consider to be serious teams that could take AD as a step towards a championship or something closer to contention. I've got Dante Exum in a lot of these trades because, in my mind, he's like a half-decent point guard that could help a few of those contending teams. Mavs fans or whoever Dante Exum has played for in the past, if he's bad, let me know. I don't have like some weird obsession with Dante Exum. He's just on a minimum contract that fits quite well into these kind of trades where we're often trading 3 or 4 players for 1 or 2. So for this trade specifically, I just did a video reacting to Bleacher Report's suggested trades, and they had a version of this that was pretty similar, but it had Asen Newell going to Dallas instead of Zachary Risichet. The reason I put Risichet in, which I said in that video as well, is that I see him as kind of a do-it-all sort of guy that potentially could use his own team. I know the general consensus out there is that he could just be a high-level role player but not a star. But in my mind, he's a good defender who can handle and can facilitate and can shoot and sort of can do a lot of things. And that's the kind of guy I'm talking about that could go nicely with Flag. You know, like Flag obviously could spend a lot of time on ball, but also we should get him off ball a little bit. Luke Kennard, the kind of shooter you want to put around a developing team like that. And Porzingis, very similar to AD in that he might not play like more than 25% of the games, but at the same time, expiring contract, can shoot, can defend, and is just a competent enough player to put around their guys while also not taking away from your Derek Lively kind of minutes that you probably want to prioritize if you're building around a young core. As for the Hawks, I do think Anthony Davis fits in really nicely into what they've got over there, especially since in this deal you're not giving up Trey. Trey and AD to me is a really nice duo, like let alone the fact that you have Jalen Johnson, Dyson Daniels on your team as well, and just the general rotation they would or could put together would be very, very solid. I don't think you're losing too much depth here. Like Kennard, Risichet, and Porzingis are all good players, obviously, but none of them are like, man, we can't give up that guy, right? Especially when you're getting the level of talent that Anthony Davis is. Whether or not he's on the court, you've still got your Jalen Johnson to run the show, your Trey Trae Young to set everyone up, I do think this would be a really good, well-balanced team. Alright, the next one I've got is a Miami trade. I think I've said enough times now that I'm a big Miami fan. See here, the price is fairly low, right? So we've got Andrew Wiggins going the other way, but we've got Terry Rozier and Simone Fontecchio as well as a first-round pick. So obviously the latter two are just expiring slash filler. I'm not positive that Andrew Wiggins would be what Dallas is after here. It's very possible that they'd prefer to have Tyler Hero, and I think, speaking for most Heat fans, the reasoning that we wouldn't want that is because the Heat kind of needs a lot more shooting, not less, right? And if you're giving up Hero and getting Davis back, you're obviously losing a lot of shooting there. Naturally, Dallas would want that kind of playmaking guard rather than a do-it-all wing, especially when you have your Cooper Flag there. But this is kind of one of those deals I'm talking about where obviously I'm making it nicer for Miami, but also I do think that there's a level of like, we have Wiggins around for a year, we can potentially flip him for assets. You know, you get rid of another wing in Najee Marshall and you can sort of rebalance your roster just by clearing your books a little bit. As for the Heat, obviously AD or adding AD to Bam would be an insane defensive duo. You still have Khalil Ware in this situation to back those two up. I feel he could play with either of them. And Najee Marshall, if you're really locked in as a Heat fan, you will know there may be some beef there. But I think with Jimmy gone and the fact that it's been a couple of years and these guys are just competitive dudes that play a lot of basketball and get into little scuffles, that would be fine. I've always been impressed with his game and I think he would fit nicely into what Miami's doing. And if you are trading Andrew Wiggins, he would be a nice low-cost kind of replacement for him. Please just ignore the little failed symbol up here. I made a lot of these trades before the December 15 deadline, so many of these players that I have moved can't be traded. But I've also seen AD mocked to the Raptors a lot. I really like that deal as well. I think it's one of in the Bleacher Report video, I talked about how Toronto's trade was kind of boring, and I think there's a lot of better options out there for them. This is one of them. RJ Barrett, I'm not sure if they would trade because his dad is like the manager or something, the boss of Canada basketball, and trading him from the Canada team might be a little bold. But I've done it in this scenario because, again, young player, I feel like he could help the Mavericks stick around long term. He's more of a 2-3 than Cooper, which is more of a 3-4, I feel. And I do think that those two could play somewhat nicely off of each other as a sort of second scorer. His contract's not terrible. It says here that he's a primary ball handler. I think Fanspo's like player archetypes are just not comprehensive enough because I don't really see Anthony Davis as a shot creator either. I'm getting into the weeds here, but Agbaji is a movement shooter. That's when I kind of just take their word for it because I don't know any better. But let's talk about the trade. So obviously the Mavericks are getting Pirtle, Agbaji, and a first as well. Potentially they could want more. Like I said, I'm not really sure where Davis's value lies just because he's so difficult to predict whether he's going to be there or not. As for the Raptors, he fits in really nicely to what they're doing there. Like next to Scotty Barnes, you still keep Brandon Ingram around. You have, obviously, quickly, you've got Grady Dick. You've got enough sort of decent guards out there now to put together quite a formidable team, I think. Whether it vaults them past the Knicks, past the Pistons, or into any kind of conversation with those top West teams, I'm unsure. But Anthony Davis is that kind of talent that you bring in to try and take that next step. Alright, I'm not sure if this one is out there too much. It's actually like almost where my mind went kind of instantly when I first heard the AD rumours. Obviously Dallas isn't massively excited about what they're getting here, and I just haven't added draft capital in this situation where I probably need to. I feel like Tari Eason would be a really nice player for them to pick up, but the rest of this is really just salary filler, and in that case I think they might want a pick or two back. As you can see, I'm starting to add contracts here to try and make the money work, and it's just not going so well without adding like a Steven Adams or something like that. A Jabari Smith Jr. I considered, but the money is so hard to match up being a poison pill kind of contract. Those are the ones where the team sending the contract out, he's only worth a smaller amount than he would be to the team bringing him in. It's really difficult to make the money work in those situations. But talking about the trade as opposed to the financials, AD on the Rockets next to Sengun, still with Steven Adams behind him, and with that kind of like, we're huge and we're going to beat you up kind of mentality. Yeah, I think the Rockets would have to add assets here, and I'm not really sure they'd be super keen to do that, to be quite honest with you. As for the Mavericks, again, they're not really getting anything super exciting, so maybe this deal doesn't actually happen, but it's an interesting thought exercise. This is another one of those ones that came to mind almost instantly, and it's more so because the Suns have sort of got a track record of going for the big name, but also their center rotation is a little weak, and I do feel that they could give up a couple of their 8 shooting guards to get a talent like this next to Booker and Brooks. Now, at this point, I think has to be put into that conversation. Gillespie's playing unreal basketball for them, and I think has nailed down the point guard spot. Obviously, they need to fill in their 4, but they've got some nice rookies over there, like your Rasheer Flemings, your Ryan Dunns, Iguodaro even. I do think 80 would fit nicely into that team. And even if they're not in that like core contender kind of group, I do think that this is the kind of move that could vault them pretty far up the standings. As for the Mavericks, again, getting a shot creator in Jalen Green, according to Fanspo at least. Grayson Allen has been shooting it out of his mind this season, and again, as I've said with other shooters, it's a helpful thing to have in a rebuilding team, just that relief and kind of spacing that you need for those young players to develop. Nick Richards is an expiring contract and salary filler. They could potentially ask for Malawach here from the Suns. The reason I didn't put him in is because I don't know the Suns would want to do that, and also because they've kind of got their center position sorted, and I'm not really thinking that's what they're after. I think Jalen Green would be maybe not the prize that everyone is yearning for in an AD trade, but the kind of upside swing that potentially could work out over them. This is one of my favorites that I came up with. I think what it does is it takes the Timberwolves out of that jail they were in where, like, without Rudy Gobert, their defense falls apart, but he's kind of unplayable offensively. Like, he actually can't catch a basketball, which is somewhat fascinating to watch. Quick little tangent. I was watching that Game 7 between the Nuggets and the Timberwolves in the conference semifinals a couple years ago live, and I was like, oh, Minnesota's cooked. You know, I'm sure half of their fans were feeling that way at halftime. And watching that comeback, like, I've seen Minnesota, like, crumble in very genuinely impressive ways, but watching that comeback be kind of the opposite of that, where it was like, is this actually going to happen? And the moment I knew it was going to happen was when Rudy Gobert hit a turnaround fadeaway jumper from like outside the paint. That was ridiculous. And I think just the plot armor carried them through the rest of that game. But as I say, you kind of can't rely on him to hit a free throw ever. I know he's around 50%, but it just feels like they're all bricks. And it's interesting to watch them try and play this like bruising offensive style where you can't throw in the ball a lot of the time because he will just drop it. Besides Gobert, they're not giving up a whole lot. You know, Conley, Dillingham, Berenger. I'm sure they're excited about the last two. Maybe less so Dillingham than initially. Berenger, I don't know much about at all, but I know that they picked him for a reason. I had Exum on the other side to replace some of Conley's ball handling. I'm not sure if he can actually play or not, but I think that AD has the offensive upside that Minnesota could use to take that step, while also being able to anchor the defense in the way that Gobert does. Alright, now we're moving into the second tier that I was talking about, the so-called unserious teams that could use a floor raiser as opposed to a ceiling raiser. I'm not massively sure the Mavericks would be stoked about getting Miles Bridges, but like, would any team really be stoked about that? Colin Sexton, expiring contract, but also the kind of guard who could help those young guys along, as I've talked about, wouldn't fit terribly next to Kyrie when he came back. And then Grant Williams is obviously just salary filler. I was quite impressed with the Hornets' draft assets, and I think that they would have to compensate the Mavericks with that to make this deal work, right? Like, you're not excited about a Bridges or a Sexton in an AD trade, and the Luka Doncic for Miles Bridges kind of post that would immediately surface on Twitter would be like devastating for that franchise. So I think they would need a boatload of picks to offset that. Picks aren't really my thing. I really struggle to evaluate the value of them, and so I might add one or two here and there because I'm like conscious that one needs to be added, but I don't know which ones are good or like how they're all going to play out. And honestly, I don't think anyone really does until. But as I say, I put a swap in here, and more could be added from the Hornets, including, as it stands, Miami's pick that was traded to the Hornets when they knew that Rozier was under a gambling scandal. And you know who else did? The NBA. But they let it happen. And I don't think that's very fair. We should get our pick back before they trade it to the Mavericks for Anthony Davis. This next one is just so Kings to me, I feel. Obviously, they get Anthony Davis. The Mavericks get Zach LaVine, Devin Carter, and Keon Ellis. Zach LaVine to me is, again, like, he's only a 2-year deal at this point. I think he is a trade kicker, so like if he got traded again, he could be making real bank for what he is. But it's the minimum contracts here that I'm actually more excited about for Dallas. Devin Carter, I feel, never got a proper go in Sacramento. I follow a little bit of draft like guys. Sam Vecini, his podcast, the Game Theory podcast, is really, really good for this stuff. Shout out Bryce Simon too. He always responds to my trade ideas on Twitter, which is so nice of him. Anyway, Devin Carter would be really nice for the Mavericks, I think, and fit that defense wins championships, if they're still thinking that kind of rationale. And Keon Ellis, same thing, right? Not getting the best opportunities in Sacramento, I feel, could use a change of scenery. Not that the Dallas Mavericks appear to be any more well run, but he kind of fits into that like gritty backcourt defense, can shoot, and plenty of opportunity for these young guys, right? As for the Kings, Sabonis and Anthony Davis together isn't necessarily the nicest fit, so I may put together one with Sabonis as well and see how that looks. But talking about it in general, like let's say Sabonis is out of there. Actually, let me just cook a different one up. All right, so here's a Sabonis one, keeping the same young guys I was talking about. Sabonis makes a little less, so I added Schroeder on the Mavericks side and Najee Marshall on the Kings to balance it out a bit. But let's say the Kings are starting whichever point guard they're feeling that week. They've just traded Schroeder here, so let's say it's Westbrook. They've still got LaVine now, DeRozan. Najee Marshall would probably play the 4 for them, or Keegan Murray, whichever of the two. And Anthony Davis is actually not a bad team, but I'm sure the Kings would find a way to mess it up. But for the Mavericks, you get the two young guys I talked about. Sabonis on that team could be interesting. I mean, obviously you've got Derek Lively that you want to give minutes to. But at the 4, one of those two being at the 4, I mean, neither of them can really shoot. It's another issue. But Sabonis is like that rebounding presence. He's obviously a hub on offense, so he could take some of the load off Flag. And Schroeder's a half-decent ball handler for, I don't know, this would be about his 15th team. He's clearly proven it around the league a few times. And could just set the Mavericks up for wow, they gave him a 3-year contract, didn't they? The Kings are crazy, man. Anyway, he'd be around for 3 years if you're interested in that. Possibly not. Again, possibly a situation where draft picks would have to be added. But yeah, as I said, this is more for the Kings to take a step, or at least to take a step towards seriousness, and then after that they can take a step towards possibly being a good team someday. But yeah, could be an interesting one. This one I put together just because the Pacers are struggling so much right now. I'm not sure they'd actually do it just because Pascal is like something of a culture hero over there, especially with Halliburton out this season. He's just been absolutely carrying. Besides that, I don't feel like they're giving up a whole lot. You could argue that Siakam is better than Davis, and maybe they'd just rather keep him. But for the purposes of this trade, let's talk through it. Alright, so over there I've got Anthony Davis, Najee Marshall again, and Dante Exum, the trio I've been trading everywhere. But, as I say, you can have Halliburton, you've got Neesmith and Nemhard still there. Najee Marshall would replace those kind of power forward minutes that you're getting from Siakam and Toppin, and then Davis obviously at your 5. I do feel like the Pacers could use that kind of defensive two-way like beast mode Anthony Davis can go into. It's a lot to give up when you're not sure he's going to be on the court, right? Replacing Miles Turner is no easy task, as funny as that sounds, because he's playing terribly for the Bucks right now, but AD would be a step up both defensively and offensively, I feel. And you've kind of got the wings to fill in the gaps, but not really the bigs, right? So Jarris Walker, who I've put in this deal as well, has not been playing well for them, unfortunately. And this feels like the kind of deal, again, where they could bridge it a little bit and go hard next year. It wouldn't be the worst thing for them if AD is sitting out the rest of this year rehabbing his body, Here we have another quintessential needs to take a step towards seriousness kind of team. So in this one, the Wizards have set themselves up with a little bit of clever capology to have a lot of cap space coming up. I'm not sure AD and Klay Thompson would be how they want to fill up that cap space, but I've put these old guys over here to obviously clear the Mavericks books, and then Bud Carrington and Cam Whitmore, both guys who I feel aren't really working out in Washington. I've also added a pick. Again, I'm not really sure how that would all play out. But let's talk about the players. These two have definitely shown something in the league, right? But again, I'm not sure Washington is like the place to foster that. So get them to another team, see if that works out. Maybe it just doesn't, in which case this return doesn't look fantastic. But you never really know with these kind of players. As for the Wizards, this is really like we need to grow up a little bit and just get some adults in the room, right? And Klay Thompson, I feel, has that kind of shit about him, right? That man has been there and done it. Okay, so he would fill the CJ McCollum, Chris Middleton kind of like shooter, culture guy, locker room guy sort of thing, and then Anthony Davis is like what's actually helping you take a step, right? Dante Exum, he's there again. I'm not sure he'd be playing a whole lot. Okay, now we're kind of getting into my funny ones, like the Shakeup. We have some bad money. Let's just do something crazy kind of deals. These are the ones I think about at like 1 a.m. and wonder if I needed help, but I just decided to start a YouTube channel instead where I could talk to people about it. So here the 76ers are effectively swapping Joel Embiid's terrible, terrible, horrible, lousy contract for Anthony Davis's potential like catastrophic injuries. You know, it's not really like one good situation for another. It's kind of the opposite of that. D'Angelo Russell coming the other way, who to me, D'Angelo Russell is just such a 76er. Like, does that not make perfect sense in your mind's eye? I feel like the way he plays, how he's like, could go crazy one night, but most of the time it's just going to be like a disaster. It's just so Philly. Jared McCain is obviously the prize going the other way here. You're not excited at all about Embiid's contract. In fact, it could be a deal breaker right off the bat. Kyle Lowry, minimum contract, not making a whole lot of difference either way. But McCain is kind of like the microwave scorer. I don't know what kind of on-ball like point guard sort of chops he has, but could definitely be a relief valve for that team. And given they have Max Christie and some other good defenders in that backcourt, he could be insulated a little bit by that sort of infrastructure there. Interesting deal. I feel like AD and Tyrese Maxey would be quite a fun duo. I thought about putting Paul George in this trade instead, but I just don't think AD and Joel together is a good idea at all. And Paul George doesn't really do anything extra for the Mavericks. So I'd be more excited to take him than Embiid, right? So this one is your classic kind of shake-up team. The Cavs would get Anthony Davis and Max Christie because they're trading two real players in Garland and Allen. So their new starting lineup would be Donovan Mitchell, Max Christie, I guess DeAndre Hunter, Evan Mobley, and Anthony Davis, which to me is quite exciting actually. You could swap Strus for DeAndre Hunter if you want a little more shooting. And then obviously the Mavericks get their point guard for the future. This guy's really, really good. And Jared Allen is a guy you could flip, I think, if you don't want another center on your team. But I did think I could have some fun with a 3-team deal, moving Allen somewhere else. So I might try that out in a little bit. For now, let's talk about this one. I think the Mavericks could be interested in Garland. He's about as good of a player as I've traded to them in any of these deals so far. And I'm not sure I can think of a better player they might be getting off the bat, even in the deals that have been talked about a lot, right? Like, when he's going to Chicago, it's going for, like, maybe Booz Ellis, but even then. As for Detroit, you're getting like your Tobias Harris and a Jaden Ivey, but I think Garland is like definitely the best player I can think of being traded to the Mavericks in this kind of situation. And Max Christie is a good player. This package got you Luka way back when. So Darius Garland and Jarrett Allen wouldn't be the worst like Luka for these guys kind of meme. But yeah, it is an interesting deal to me that I think I haven't seen out there too much, so I wanted to put it out there myself. Okay, so we're going back to like my shake-up, this needs fixing sort of teams. So here we've got Zion and DeJounte Murray going to the Mavericks for AD and Klay Thompson. And AD going next to Derek Queen could be good for that guy's development, but also just to have a real solid defensive five next to him. He's such a fun player to watch, man. Derek Queen is great. As for the Mavericks side of it, they get kind of a flyer, I think you could call that, on Zion Williamson, in the sense that he is injured just as often as Anthony Davis, but he could be really fun next to Cooper Flag, actually. And DeJounte Murray obviously still injured with the Achilles tear from last season. I've always been interested in him as a player. I think he was really interesting on the Spurs, and I wanted him in Miami for a long time. It didn't quite work out in Atlanta, even though I thought it really would. And obviously the Pelicans, he wasn't there for long before getting hurt. But I do think he could be the kind of guy who really helps out that Mavericks team like in the future. And in a way, getting him while he's injured and has low value could be a nice move for the Mavericks when they're trying to take a step. And Cooper, while being 18 or maybe 19 right now, is actually really good and could take the step sooner than you think. So getting these kind of guys that, like, you know, you're buying low, but the talent is quite obviously there, could be an interesting way for them to retool quickly with an Anthony Davis trade. Alright, I said I was going to cook up a 3-teamer. I threw Chicago into this one. Not sure how I feel about it yet, but let's talk through it. So the Cavs get AD like they did before. This time instead of Max Christie, they're getting Ayo Dosunmu, a very similar player to Max Christie, and I've kind of already talked through why I think that would be nice for the Cavs. Let's go to the Bulls. They're effectively swapping Vooch's expiring for 4 years of Jared Allen and getting Najee Marshall as well, which I think, like, along with sending Dosunmu and a pick that I've sent to the Mavericks, is not a bad, like, return for them. Allen will be that kind of defensive platform that Vooch just can't be, and obviously Vooch is on that older timeline than the rest of the team, and maybe looking to move on anyway. The Mavs get Garland, like I talked about before, and Craig Porter Jr. is another point guard prospect. Vooch's expiring is useful, but his shooting also could be useful in the interim. Yeah, could be an interesting 3-way deal. I had fun cooking this up. Let me know if you'd have any other ideas to get AD to the Cavs. Okay, so at first I had tried to put Golden State in that, like, contender taking a step kind of tier, but it just wasn't working as a 1-for-1 swap, so I decided to come back to it with a 3-teamer. So the Warriors are getting Anthony Davis here, Klay Thompson, the return. I felt like that was kind of nice, and Najee Marshall to fill the Jimmy Butler spot. So in this situation, I've traded Jimmy and Kuminga. That's kind of where all the money is coming from. Jimmy is going to the Hornets, and this is a video I plan to make quite soon, but it's kind of talking about those get serious sort of floor teams where it was like, alright, we need to grow up a little bit, we need to do like a Fred VanVleet to the Rockets kind of deal, that sort of, we're not close to contending yet, but we need some adults in the room who can sort of settle us down and organize us. I've seen a lot of Warriors fans being frustrated with Jimmy Butler, and trust me, I can understand that. He's incredible, like, when he tries, and some of my favourite memories watching basketball are him just going off in the playoffs. But man, when he's just like passing the ball and not being aggressive and then calling out teammates afterwards and then taking 3 shots the next game, it's like, dude, please, you're getting $54 million, like, look at the basket. And in a way, I think the Hornets could use his kind of, like, keeping LaMelo and Brandon Miller and everything they've got over there, they could use his kind of IQ and organizing without necessarily him having to be the number one option, which I think is kind of his sweet spot. Talking about the Mavericks, again, the Miles Bridges thing keeps coming up. Luka for Miles Bridges is a tough pill to swallow, and it's not great PR. Colin Sexton, I mentioned before when we talked about the Hornets in that straight swap deal, could be a decent guard for them to pick up. Pat Connaughton, just your expiring. But Pods and Kuminga are interesting prospects from the Warriors that were initially my motivation for the 1-to-1 trade. And I think they could be cool for Dallas to pick up in this deal. So Kuminga especially fits nicely in between Lively and Flag, I think. Just that extra scorer, paint pressure, that sort of thing. And then Podziemski could be the next Steph Curry, or so he says. So as far as a shooter and like a ball handler, again, according to Fanspo, a primary ball handler, watching him live, I'm not sure he would be that all the time. But then again, like, what else has Dallas got? I think more picks would have to be involved in this deal. I'm not sure from who and to where, but I think the framework of a deal is here, and I'd be interested to see this. Alright, those were my AD trades. I think we hit 14 teams, including the 3-teamers there, so let me know if any of them piqued your interest, whether you could fix them up, or if you can help me out with where the picks should go. Thanks for watching, and I hope your team doesn't get fleeced.